Ms. Mandayan, I'll start with you. Will you take the Tories up on their offer?
Well, I wouldn't even call it an offer. It's basically a gimmick. We've been stuck. We've been pretty much paralyzed in the House since September. This is not a very serious way of proceeding. I think Canadians would like their House of Commons to function and to function normally. I think we should have debate in the House, not just this artificial window created by Pierre Poilievre. And I think that it is important for us to proceed responsibly, especially now. And I think Canadians are looking to us to act responsibly, especially now, given everything that's going on in the world, given what we know is an important economic time for Canada. I would note that we are in a remarkable position right now. We are expected to have the highest growth among all G7 countries next year. And for this year, we're behind in growth only to the United States. And we are actually spending less than the United States. So it kind of makes sense. If you look at our deficit numbers are under 2%. In the United States, it's hovering at 6% of their GDP. They're investing tons of money in order to make their economy
And I do know that
move.
your government keeps making the point relative to other countries when you look at the debt to GDP ratio, for example, that it puts Canada in a favorable light. But that isn't the only metric you set for yourself as a fiscal anchor. You actually promised as a government to make sure that the deficit did not exceed $40 billion. The PBO says it's already passed that. You've since added new spending in the form of this tax holiday. Essentially, the insinuation from the opposition is that you're not willing to table this because you have something to hide, because you don't want that number out in the public. Do they have a point?
We've confirmed that we're coming out with the fez. You actually mentioned it in your opening. Absolutely.
Well, actually, just to be fair, nobody has. I was told that yesterday, and then people from the finance department were calling saying, why are you saying that? Why are you saying that? So are you saying for sure it's coming out next week?
We are coming out with a fall economic statement. It will be out before the House of Commons breaks for the holidays. And I think it is important for us to come to Canadians with what the books look like. But I also think it's important for us to have affordability measures. And the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre himself has failed to explain to Canadians why he's against a tax break at a time when we know Canadians need it. It's not only good relief for Canadians when they need it, it's actually good economic policy. BMO and others have revised.
How is it good economic policy? I interviewed David Dodge, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, who said that, it's like offering candy that doesn't fix the overall problem, that there's nothing structurally that addresses the issues in the economy there. It's essentially, almost like a political favor, like that you're hoping to get.
The Canadians that I'm talking to don't think of it that way. They think of it as help when they need it. And in terms of the economics of it, BMO and others have revised their growth numbers upwards as a result of this measure. Restaurants Canada has come out saying that this is going to be necessary help to restaurants, in particular in the months of January and February when their sales are not good. The Independent Grocers Association said that this will actually be helpful to Canadians, and they're supportive of the measure, and so are a lot of small businesses. I mean, never mind the moms and dads out there that are going to be buying Christmas presents for their kids. Never mind the folks that are having trouble buying clothing and boots and things that their families need.
Okay, let me put that to Mr. Scheer. The Liberals are very much saying that this is sort of hard to reconcile for Canadians, that your party would campaign on a message of affordability over the last number of years and how tax cuts can help the issue and address the issue of affordability, and then say that they're going to vote against something that would do just that. How do you justify that for Canadians?
Well, it's quite simple, because this isn't substantial, meaningful, permanent tax relief. This is a 2-month gimmick. My colleague wants to talk about gimmicks. Saving a dime or a quarter off a bag of chips isn't going to help people deal with the housing costs, which the Liberals have doubled. It's not going to help Canadians put fresh produce on the table during winter because of the carbon tax increasing transportation costs. So we've called for meaningful tax relief, permanent tax relief, accompanied with the end to the wasteful spending to help pay for it. And when the Liberals go out and borrow more money and spend it in this way, that adds to the national debt. And what my Liberal colleague's not telling you, we don't get graded on the curve in terms of what other countries are doing when it comes to deficits and debt, because now your tax dollar is going to pay more and more interest on that debt that they've racked up, to the point where now the federal government is at the point where it's basically spending more just to pay the interest on the debt that Mr. Trudeau has racked up than it is on healthcare. So all this borrowing does have consequences. So we have meaningful ways.
I do understand that, but I think that the point that they're making relative to the other countries is around the issue of debt and deficit. I take your point on the sort of intrinsic nature versus other years, but if you do look at the situation other countries are in, the debt and deficit is lower relative to other countries in the G7.
When you look at the eye-watering, eye-popping debt that Justin Trudeau has tacked onto the backs of Canadians. Canadians now have to work more and more of their working day is now going just to pay the bankers and bondholders who hold the debt that Justin Trudeau has racked up. That's not a responsible way to run the economy. And it also adds to inflation. Justin Trudeau himself admitted that every dollar in relief that he might do this way would add to inflation. And now 6 or 7 months later after he said that, he's now done a complete 180. What would really help people?
I take it on the permanent side, but in the meantime, if it's going to give them 2 months of a break, and in Ontario, for example, it's 13%. It's not 5 cents on a bag of chips. Chips are right now $5 a bag. 13% isn't nothing.
Depending on which size of bag you buy, and I do tend to buy the large ones.
Maybe that's too revealing on my husband's part. I'll blame him.
Yeah. My kids, they just buy those big bags. Yeah. No, but honestly, we know that when the end of this 2-month period is over, Justin Trudeau is going to hike the carbon tax yet again. That's his plan. He's going to quadruple the carbon tax. So basically what the Liberals have said is that this is their plan. This is their plan to address affordability and the cost of living crisis that the Liberals caused. They're going to give you a 2-month temporary tax break on a handful of items. Our plan is a permanent canceling of the carbon tax, which will not just lower the cost of living, lower grocery prices, but also lead to economic growth so that wages go up and our economy does better. So that's the plan. So what we're saying is, hey, let's take this to the Canadian people. If my Liberal colleague is so confident that Canadians support her temporary 2-month tax trick over our permanent cancellation of the carbon tax, why not let Canadians decide? People can want
more permanent relief, but also, demand and hope for a little bit of temporary
relief. It goes back to the point that if this is going to massively increase the size of that deficit, that has real-world consequences. That means interest rates stay up higher longer because now the government's going out borrowing money. And when the government has to borrow billions more, it competes with everybody else who's borrowing money, mortgage holders, businesses who want to reinvest in their companies. So they have to pay higher interest rates to compete with the government borrowing.
I want to bring in Mr. Davies. We'll get an idea about the key lending rate next week on Wednesday when the Bank of Canada introduces or makes their announcement. Your party today has plans to introduce a motion that will expand actually the cost of what the Liberals are proposing they do by sending those $250 checks out to more people, seniors, people with disabilities. The category seemed fairly broad. That already carried a very hefty price tag for people who make under $150,000. How fiscally responsible is it to write a check to everyone, basically, who makes under $150,000 or who can't work? What is the sort of sense of that policy?
Well, look, after listening to Ms. Bandayan, you'd think that things are really rosy in Canada. That's not the feedback that we're getting. The numbers that I'm getting is 50% of Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck. The Salvation Army reported, Vassy, that 1 in 4 parents are skipping meals so that they can feed their children. 80% of Canadians are worried about spending during the upcoming holiday season. So people are really struggling across this country. So the problem that we've pointed out with the Liberal plan, by the way, they didn't negotiate that or work with anybody. They just announced this $250 plan.
You initially said you'd support, by the way, and then a week later said it doesn't go far enough.
As soon as we found out that the $150,000 was contingent on receiving employment income and left out seniors on fixed incomes making $25,000 a year, disabled workers, maybe with children at home, earning $35,000 or $40,000 a year, we pointed out the fundamental unfairness of that, frankly, the absurdity of it. When people are struggling, if the Liberals consider it necessary to send $150,000 or checks to people making under $150,000, if that's what they think is needed, then surely those checks should go to the most vulnerable people in our society. And that's what we pointed out.
But why is it going to anyone who makes $149,000? Like, why doesn't your motion instead focus on, you're right to point out, I did an interview on radio today with a homeless shelter that was saying that the number of kids that go there over Christmas has now tripled in this month. Like, there are people who are hurting. Why aren't you forcing the government to focus in on them? Why are you condoning sending checks to people who make $149,000 a year?
Well, we haven't done anything on that. We forced Liberals to split that from the GST, temporary GST relief, which, by the way, I want to point out that Mr. Scheer and his party ran on a 1-month GST temporary holiday just in 2021, the very last election. So they were proposing temporary tax relief at that time. We're the only party that has proposed permanent GST tax relief.
Sure. And I think those questions are fair to the Conservatives. That's why I directed them to Mr. Scheer. My question to you is, like, you could have used your motion today to really focus in on the people who need it with those checks, and you didn't. You just said add it to the pile.
Well, this is not our plan. What we've said to Liberals, we pointed out the fundamental unfairness and absurdity of their plan. Now, it's up to them to fix it. That's a great question to ask Liberals. Why did they pick a $150,000 threshold? But we're pointing out is if they're going to be sending checks to people, it has to go to the most vulnerable people in our country, or else we won't support it.
Okay, I've got 30 seconds. I just want to get one last round, 30 seconds for each of you. Are you going to change the structure of who you give those checks to? Why on earth did it make sense to send them to someone who makes $148,000 a year?
Listen, we're taking feedback from opposition members. We're in a minority government situation, so obviously we need to ensure that there is at least one other party in the House willing to support this measure in order to get it passed. And we just received today the NDP's proposal. For them to deny that it's their plan is a little bit disingenuous, but I think that we will take a look at it and we'll see what we can do. But at the same time,
on principle, does it not make sense? Like, does it make sense to you to send a check to somebody who makes $148,000 and not to someone who has a disability?
Absolutely. It's the reason why we are targeting a lot of our measures to the most vulnerable people. It's the reason why we have consistently supported seniors. As a government, we have done more to support seniors than anybody else, increasing old age security, reducing the age of retirement. Being there for the most vulnerable is a hallmark, actually, of this Liberal government. I think what we are trying to do is target workers who have not seen a program specifically designed for them in the years that we have been in office, but to suggest that somehow the GST break is not going to help everybody is ridiculous. This is a measure that helps all Canadians, including the most vulnerable, especially the most vulnerable, including seniors. And we don't have a clear answer from the opposition as to why they're against it. In fact, the Conservatives proposed it themselves and now all of a sudden call it a gimmick. It is a joke to see Pierre Poilievre stand up in the House, call for axing the tax, and then refusing to vote for a tax break.
Let me ask Mr. Scheer, because both Mr. Davies and Ms. Mindine bring up the point that under Erin O'Toole, you were a member of the party, you campaigned in 2021. This was a policy proposal, a 1-month holiday. Why was it okay then and not now?
Well, it's if you look at what our current leader, Pierre Poilievre, is talking about, it's permanent tax relief, and that's what the choice is for Canadians. A permanent cancelling of the carbon tax that causes so much economic damage and drives up the cost of literally everything, especially when our largest trading partner and competitor, the United States, doesn't have one at all. Vulnerable Canadians have been hit the hardest by Justin Trudeau's inflationary policies. Seniors on fixed incomes whose pensions don't keep up with inflation at all have seen a massive bite taken out of their ability to put food on the table.
But they would save 13% over the next 2 months.
You know what's an even better idea? A permanent cancellation of the carbon tax. And again,
why is it one or the other?
Again, because when the government goes out and borrows all this money, all the relief that Canadians might feel, the temporary relief they might feel for a moment in time, gets evaporated, obliterated by inflation, by the need for the government to then go and raise taxes to pay for the interest on the debt that they just racked up again. So it's
but
like
nobody expects the key lending rate to go down on Wednesday. To go up on Wednesday, pardon me.
It's like drinking a glass of salt water. It might feel refreshing for a little while, but ultimately it does more damage than good, because all that extra debt keeps the pressure on interest rates to stay up, causes inflation. Justin Trudeau said that interest rates are way higher than they were when many Canadians locked into their mortgages, and many Canadians are renewing it now at 2, 3, 4, 5 percentage points higher than they were. And inflation has taken a big bite out of their monthly paychecks. So not only are they paying more on their mortgages, but they're paying more for daily goods and essentials, and that's all because of Justin Trudeau's economic policies. These things don't happen.
Interest rates are going down. It's
well,
a fact, right? Like they have the last 4 times.
We've got a lot of issues facing our economy. We've got a dollar that's been sliding. That also contributes to inflation. We've got more and more of your tax. Yeah, exactly. Well, how about the Justin Trudeau tariffs that he's imposing on Canada himself with the carbon tax and with his capital gains tax?
Because I got to get Mr. Trust. I feel as though over the next month and a half we will be discussing that. Mr. Davies, I'll give the last word to you. Ms. Bendayan, seemed to be open to the idea that there is a negotiation to be had about who gets these checks. Why is your party not forcing it to go to the more vulnerable over giving it to people who make as much as $150,000 a year?
Well, look, I look forward to Ms. Bendayan and Liberals and supporting our motion, which we're introducing tomorrow, that would see seniors, people living with disabilities, etc.
It becomes more expensive, more inflationary.
Well, we don't apologize for making sure that relief goes to the most vulnerable in the country. That's what we're asking the government to do. This is their plan. We're asking them to fix it. Now, the bottom line is that only the NDP proposed permanent GST tax relief several weeks ago. The Liberals came back with a temporary program, which the Conservatives campaigned on in 2021.
Which you supported
a week ago. The Conservatives
ago.
voted against. Now, can you imagine the Conservatives voted against a tax cut to people at a vulnerable time right now? Something that'll save, if you're in Ontario or Atlantic Canada, about $250. They call that chump change. You know what? To a single mother or someone living with children at home, $250 makes a big difference to people. Might not to Mr. Scheer.
But you're advocating for that check going to everybody, not just those people who are more vulnerable. Your motion says nothing of that.
The GST tax cut we already voted for, and we just want that made permanent. It's the $250 that's coming in the spring that we want broadened.
Okay, I got to leave it there. I appreciate all of you making time for the discussion. Rachel Bendayan, Andrew Scheer, and Don Davies.